Welcome to 7 Words, 7 Women. This is a Good Friday worship experience that we began here at King of Kings Lutheran Church 2 years ago. And we took the 7 words that Jesus says from the cross, and I asked 7 other women ordained ministers to preach to each word. We incorporated prayer and various kinds of music. It took place on Good Friday between noon and 3. People could come and go, stay as long as they chose. Many, even that first year, stayed all 3 hours. It was growing. People were coming. This year, I'm talking to you from an empty sanctuary, 1 month into our quarantine because of the coronavirus. And so today, this year's 7 Words, 7 Women will be different. I want to mention that the reason for this is tied to the ordination of women. This is the 50th year anniversary of the ordination of women in the ELCA, this denomination, and yet still, across the board, less than a third of all clergy are women. Far fewer are bishops. Percentage-wise, we have a long way to go. The Easter story definitively shows that women were the first commissioned to go into the world and tell the good news. And yet, today, in many places, men, other women, insist women are supposed to be quiet in church. This year, I've invited 7 women in this congregation, myself included, to speak a word on a word from the cross that Jesus said. All of these women have life experiences that have witnessed suffering, tragedy, death, and the grace of God breaking in their darkest moments. Surely they too are qualified to tell their story in terms of what Jesus said to the cross then and what the God of all mercy has to say to them and to us today. Let us pray. My God, the days are blending one into the next. I have to look at a calendar several times to know what day it is. It's hard. I feel like my brain is working more slowly. The prayer requests increase. The news of people who know people who have died is picking up, and I cry to you. As we enter into a time of reflection on your crucifixion, I pray that we will hear in it a word of hope for each of us. I pray for the women who were bold enough to proclaim on this Good Friday. I pray for all those who are suffering, all the workers keeping us fed, working their best to heal. God, there's so much more to pray about, and yet I am at a loss for words. Maybe when we get closer to the end of this trauma and this tragedy, day will return And so I invoke your Spirit, who prays for us in sighs too great for words. On this Good Friday, for all the prayers I never wanted to need. Jesus' first word from the cross. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. An interesting first word, to be sure, for him to say about those who crucified him, even while it was happening. Father, forgive them. 8 years ago, I wrote something about forgiveness. It begins like this. Henry Nouwen writes, "It is hard for me to forgive someone who has really offended me, especially when it happens more than once. Maybe the reason it seems hard for me to forgive others is that I do not fully believe that I am a forgiven person. If I could fully accept the truth that I am forgiven and do not have to live in guilt or shame, I would really be free. My freedom would allow me to forgive others 70 times 7 times. By not forgiving, I chain myself to a desire to get even, thereby losing freedom. A forgiven person forgives." This is what we proclaim when we pray, "And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." I continued, "I have learned that forgiving ourselves or accepting that we are forgiven by God even after we repeatedly confess and our heart is overcome with remorse is one of the most difficult things for people to do. I have been in the position of having to forgive and of having to ask for forgiveness many times. I ask myself, what does it feel like to be forgiven? My mind goes blank. I feel nothing. I replay in my mind moments in my life when I have been engaged in forgiving or being forgiven. One stands out. We were in a very noisy place. The conversation wasn't planned. The offense was several years behind us. The offenses were mutual. The collective damage, great. The conversation took on a life of its own. We drew near one another, and the clatter of plates and laughter surrounding us faded as if by a great muffler. There was an urgency to our whispers. When at last all our words had poured out between us, our foreheads were nearly touching, and I remember feeling as if I had just come through a near-fatal accident. Relief doesn't fully capture the experience, but in describing what forgiveness feels like, it's a good start. These days, I find myself haunted by the concept of forgiveness. A more seasoned pastor in my fourth church, I know that it is something I should teach, something I should model, something we all need to understand more. In the Christian tradition, we talk a good game about forgiveness. It seems to me we don't give a whole lot of instructions on how to do it, how it happens. But today, I'm struggling with forgiveness myself. I heard Governor Cuomo from New York City, currently devastated by this coronavirus. I heard him speak the other night, and he ended his words with a mournful, "It didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen." And that's where I've landed with so much of the suffering in the world today, in all of our lives, the suffering, the pain, the death, the separation, the isolation. And I do hold people responsible. I do. I know that it's complicated. It isn't one thing, one person. But surely there are people who could have prevented some of it who chose not to. So today when I hear, "Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing," I hear it anew. I hear it this way. Father, forgive them, because I may not be able to this side of heaven. And maybe that is some kind of a grace to those of us so angry now that we have no idea how to enter in to forgiving.
When Pastor Marie called me earlier this week to ask me to participate in this service, part of me was thrilled, part of me was exhausted, and part of me was panicked. I had 48 hours. I rushed to my bookshelf to reread the Bible verses she had given me, then did the next thing all biblical scholars do. I Googled. My first Google result was an article by a well-known conservative evangelical church leader. It was an explanation of the verses and just a few paragraphs long. It said basically that this portion of the story was to teach us what we need to do in order to get into heaven. Confess our sins and acknowledge Jesus as our Savior. If we don't do that, no entrance to paradise. That did not sit well with me. First of all, because of grace, and second, because it was much too easy, too black and white, too good and bad. But this is the world we live in. This is an either-or world. Either you're pro this or anti that. You're either a good guy or a bad one. Watch cable news or go onto Twitter for more than 2 minutes and people are red in the face telling us what's right or wrong. A split screen showing two opposites that will likely never come together. The problem with this is that most things are not so clear-cut, and we often have many feelings about the same thing. There is nuance and complexity even within the simplest thing. This is most apparent to me as a mom. How can I love someone with my whole heart and also desperately want alone time? How can this tiny human bring me the happiest and the most frustrating moments of my life? Sometimes feeling more than one thing can lead to shame and guilt. For example, if I was a good mom, I would never be angry at my baby for waking up 5 times a night. I should only think positively. I should be grateful. What's wrong with me? I ask myself these questions a lot, and then, upon reflection, have realized I was putting myself in an either-or situation, where one feeling canceled out another. I am either a good, grateful mom or a bad, selfish mom. The most freeing thing was to realize I didn't have to do that. I could feel both things. I could feel like the luckiest person in the world and feel frustrated. I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, I would want one that said both and. So you may be asking, what does this have to do with the 2 thieves being crucified next to Jesus? What does this have to do with paradise? As I read and reread the verses, I couldn't help but think, I feel like I'm both of them. Sure, I like to think of myself as the second thief who reacts the right way when faced with a challenging situation, piously accepting my fate and trusting in God. But I would be lying if I said I didn't also sometimes think, why is this happening if there is a God? Please, God, please show your power and fix this immediately. Something as small as a baby crying at 3 a.m. can bring this out in me, so I would probably not have the best reaction to crucifixion. But what if this story wasn't meant as a dichotomy? What if it isn't that people are either one or the other? What if we are all both of them? Always striving for faith and trust, but likely, often, falling short because we're human. As I came to this conclusion, I was reminded of something Marty Cope once said about Jesus separating the wheat from the chaff. He said, Jesus isn't separating the good people from the bad people. He is separating the good and bad within us. Based on what I've heard about Jesus, this makes sense to me. He didn't stick people in categories like that. He didn't pick only the good ones. He hung out with people who had sketchy pasts according to the cultural norms of the time, and who likely didn't always think and do the exact perfect thing. And on the cross, he didn't condemn the first thief to hell and guarantee heaven for the other. He heard the first man's taunts without reply, but then validated the thought process of the second. Isn't that how we often make decisions within our own minds? For example, we may begin with a harsh judgment of a friend or colleague or ourselves, but upon further internal examination, come to a more compassionate conclusion. Therefore, I think this is meant as a threefold lesson. First, how to navigate conflicting feelings within ourselves about God. Second, how to navigate conflicting feelings about other people. And finally, how to navigate conflicting feelings within ourselves. Situations like the COVID-19 outbreak are bringing out a lot of feelings in all of us, and for good reason. I'm a therapist, and I have heard again and again in the last few weeks, I am so disappointed, scared, angry about this, but I should be looking on the bright side. So on top of dealing with the challenges of a global pandemic, where we're worried about our health and food and safety, we're dealing with a lot of shame and guilt as well. What if instead we let ourselves feel both things? We can be thankful that we're employed and terrified of going to work. We can feel grateful for the extra time with our families and frustrated with the challenges of homeschooling. We can be good friends and not have the energy, time, or resources to bring meals to all our neighbors. Just as these two seemingly opposite men existed right next to Jesus as he died on the cross, these two parts exist within all of us. Jesus is there through all of it, holding it all and validating the best of what we seek to be. And maybe this is what paradise includes. All of us with God as the whole, imperfect, and complex people that we are, following in Jesus's lead of love, acceptance, and holding contradictions.
I am a nurse, but before you start thinking I'm some kind of hero, let me tell you about my job. I work in a cardiology clinic in a comfortable office with a window and some lovely plants on the ledge. Right now, my job is to call patients for follow-up on things such as symptoms, medication management, prescription refills, and so forth. I'm still going to my office 4 days a week like I normally do, although things at the clinic are anything but normal right now. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, our usually bustling clinic has come to a screeching halt. On any normal day, there may be close to 50 staff working, but now there are maybe 10 of us at the most. On typical days, hundreds of patients come through our doors, but now we only see patients virtually through video or phone visits. There are no procedures or tests being done, our lab is closed, and the cardiac rehab gym is shut down. It's eerily quiet everywhere you go. The staff that are still working are wearing masks at all times in the clinic. We are washing our hands and Purelling a lot more than usual. And of course, we're keeping a safe distance from each other. So yeah, I'm a nurse, but I'm not on the front lines. A few weeks ago, as the virus began to ramp up, my supervisor asked for volunteers for deployment, meaning leave your safe, comfortable clinic job and go wherever you are needed most, on the front lines, in the hospital, in the trenches, so to speak. I did not volunteer. I was scared, terrified to be exact, and maybe feeling a little selfish too. I thought, you know, I worked in the ICU for 10 years. I saw more suffering, pain, and tragedy and death than one person should ever see in their lifetime. I worked during the Ebola epidemic, H1N1, SARS. I've dealt with C. diff, MRSA, and VRE. Am I being selfish or self-righteous? I don't know. But I was scared of getting the virus. Scared of bringing it home to my husband, who is high risk because of his age. Scared of being put in a situation where I wouldn't feel competent and be able to provide safe care to the most vulnerable, sick patients. So, I stayed silent. I kept my fingers crossed. I hoped that someone else would step up. I stayed under the radar. Last week, I found out that my friend and coworker, Rachel, had been mandated to be deployed to work at the hospital. Rachel, who recently became a new mom at the age of 40. Rachel, who had endured several rounds of infertility treatments that finally resulted in the miracle birth of Henry exactly 1 year ago. Why did they call her and not me? I felt so ashamed and guilty. I later learned that only one nurse was needed from our clinic, only one. If I had volunteered, there would have been no need to mandate Rachel. I was tormented by this thought, if only. So, I prayed about it. I asked for wisdom and clarity. I asked for a willing heart. I discussed it with my husband. And then I called my supervisor. I asked her to take me instead of Rachel. I don't have a baby at home, I said. My kids are grown and my husband is healthy. Please take me instead of her. But the answer was no. It doesn't work that way, but thanks for the offer. So now all I can do is pray. Pray that maybe the number of new cases will slow down and Rachel won't be needed. Pray that if she is deployed, that she won't get infected. Pray that she doesn't bring the virus home to her family and little Henry. Henry, who just celebrated his first birthday with a virtual birthday party, ending in bright blue frosting all over his chubby cheeks. Henry with the curly red hair, just like his mom's. Henry, who just yesterday, I got a video from Rachel, he took his first steps. This word that Jesus speaks from the cross, this word of care, of providing for, of looking beyond his own pain to the future of those who are already grieving his death. This word in which Jesus does an introduction of all things to connect two people he loves. This word of substituting John for himself is painfully relevant right now. as doctors and nurses around the world are using their precious break time not to eat or sleep, but to sign wills and draft plans for their own children if they should not survive this life-robbing virus they are trying to help others survive. I imagine Mary at the cross, looking at her son, remembering how not so long ago he had been her miracle baby. I imagine she was scared. I envision her choking on her sobs so as to try to protect her son from her own agony. I imagine her looking around wildly for someone, anyone she could attack in the same way they had attacked her boy. And I see her shrinking with fear even as she looks for a target. I know her heart was shattered. I do not want to linger with this vision of Mary being asked to say goodbye to her son, resisting all thoughts of a future without him in it. And yet I know Mary's heartache echoes in the hearts of mothers everywhere right now, as children suffer, die, leaving mothers in reconfigured families, possibly with new members, none of whom can fill the empty place their child left behind. And how could John ever be a substitute for her own son? I wait to hear from my friend. I watch my phone for a text. I wonder how Rachel will find the strength to say goodbye to Henry, her miracle baby, especially that first time she leaves for the unknown. I wonder if she and he will be spared such suffering. I think back on my decision, not fully confident in what I did or what I might do when the next round of deployment happens. I find myself thinking, what does love ask of us? Why must we make choices that each bring with them heartache? How do we hold one another up in the face of such enormous uncertainty and fear? How do we expand ourselves in response to what we are asked to do? I have believed in God since I was, well, Henry's age, I suppose. I was raised in the church, and thankfully, 20 years ago, I found my way to this beloved community of faith at King of Kings. I hold on to the belief that somehow God will provide. I only hope God's provision will not be like this one when Jesus gave over his mother to a new son and his friend to his only mother. Mary had no choice but to trust in what Jesus provided. Such blind faith. Born of love and sacrifice, fear and vulnerability, and one messy human story in which I place my hope.
I'm Sally Cope. I'm going to be using notes today because my wonderful ability to memorize everything seems to have faded quite a bit over the last decades. Pastor Marie asked me to do the word, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? These are the words that Jesus was speaking on the afternoon of his crucifixion. These words reverberated around the known world at that time, and this, of course, was long before English was even known. And yet, those words still echo with that powerful cry around the world even today. For me, in this cry, I see Jesus as fully human, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Arms pinioned, arms that are meant to embrace, but also fully God on the pinnacle of something that we can't even possibly imagine. Immediately, as Pastor Marie asked me to do this word, I had a visceral response. I'll explain that more later. I was struck by the juxtaposition of this with the coronavirus. Think about it. A month ago, Michigan was not even on the radar as far as coronavirus cases, and now it has escalated or skyrocketed, and we are all self-quarantined. This video, virtual Good Friday service is evidence of that. I do know that the experience that I'm going to relate is absolutely insignificant in the face of first responders, in the face of thousands of families and people around the world who have experienced losses of what they treasure the most. My gut punch wasn't even about life and death. I flashed on Marty's and my 57-year-old daughter, Lynn. She lives in a group home designated as a medically fragile home. She is with her other 5 residents. Lynn is wheelchair-bound. she has no ability to self-care, even minimally. Well, she can reach for things. She certainly can. Now the home is in total isolation, with only staff permitted in and authorized persons. No visitors. Just the night before Pastor Marie called me, I had this dream. It was a nightmare, really. I dreamed about Lynn. I can still see it. She was writhing in agony and pain and wailing. Now the thing is, Lynn never does this. Never. What I recognized then was I was connecting to her sense of separation. Lynn was abandoned and forsaken by us. We've come to know Lynn, of course, and we know that somehow or another she anchors to these weekly visits that we have with her. They're gentle. We sometimes feed her ice cream. We take her for rides. We touch and brush her hair and talk to her. She can't talk back, but now this abandonment that we are experiencing on her behalf has hit us really hard. Her dad, my husband Marty, experiences this in ways that reduce him to tears. And we know this is predictive of what is going to become permanent for Lynn. She will lose us. We will not outlive her. Now, I'm going to reflect for myself about experiences of feeling God-forsaken, abandoned. I regained consciousness before the ambulance arrived at the small rural hospital. I had no idea where I was. Later information, I'd find out that I had broken ribs and lacerations and a head injury, but at that moment, I actually asked the movie question, where am I? I did. And I was given city and state, but it didn't have any context for me. I was alone. I did know that my tiny daughter was rescued from a snowbank feet first. I asked for a Lutheran pastor who came and stood by my gurney, which was in the hallway because there wasn't personnel to attend to me. And he told me that my husband had died as a result of this terrific crash between the truck and our car. There weren't any beds in the hospital, so I was moved from a gurney to a hospital bed and put in the hallway. Of course, it was December and it was dark and it was cold, but it probably wasn't dark where I was. It just felt dark. I had no idea where I was, and no one was with me. The baby had been whisked off to a newborn nursery. My husband's sister's nurses all came the next day and scooped up Kim and took her home with them and took care of her. Over the next few days, I learned that the car that we had been driving in had been demolished, along with a trailer that we were hauling that housed everything that we owned. Wasn't all that much, but it was what we had. And I'm sorry. So, I had no husband, I had no income, I had no possessions, I had no family to turn to. I had no education. I had no money, and I had no home. I had my little baby daughter. This is what I wanted to stress for you. That was a setup for this, but I was released on the day of my husband's funeral. I don't know how I got to the church, but it was the first funeral I had ever experienced. I was in the It was the first funeral I had ever experienced. I had no family or close friends there. There were people I knew, but I was once again in a church in a city that I didn't know. As I was standing in that vestibule, someone handed me my baby. I hadn't held her since before the accident. And she promptly threw up all over me. Of course she did. Of course she did. And someone whisked her away and cleaned her up, and somebody tended to me. I had an experience in that church vestibule. I don't talk about it. It just seems unbelievable. Marty knows, my husband of 61 years. As I prepared to walk into that church, behind that coffin, knowing that when I walked down that aisle, all eyes would be on this 20-year-old, battered, bruised, bandaged woman. As I was standing there, alone, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I did. I truly did. I felt the presence of God. I did. I'm going to switch a little bit here as I wind up. Pastor Marie gave me a quote that I think is useful right now with this word, powerful word. A pastor and theologian, Frederick Beaker, spoke or preached or wrote, I don't know, about these words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? My God, though God is not there for him to see or hear, he calls on him still because he can do no other. Not even the cross, not even death, not even life can destroy his love for God, even when his heart is all but broken. Sometimes we repair in broken places, and sometimes we do not, but we are never alone. My be ye lifted moment in that church vestibule. I had an astounding recovery eventually. Just as surely as my daughter Lynn Andrea will have loving people, her sisters, other people, see to her that when we cannot, she will ultimately be enfolded, embraced by the arms of her Lord, who will heal her in broken places.
Kept my soul.
from shame. By your word I have heard, you are still the one who gives me life.
Human beings are so predictable. You tickle them and they laugh. You smile at them. You hope they smile back. You beat them and they cry out. You beat them long enough, and they'll do anything to make you stop. I am thirsty. How many times have I heard them say that? Almost all of them say it in the end. Human beings are so predictable. When I became a soldier, all I wanted to do was travel, fight, and get laid. And they send me here, to the backside of the empire. And all we do is try and keep down troublemakers like this. All I do is nail them up and listen to the darn moaning and their "I am thirsties." I'm sick of it. I'm sick to my soul of it. I am thirsty. I could break his legs now and be done with it. Don't all these people know that I'm thirsty too? That I want things too? Doing this, I won't call it a job. Doing this to other human beings disgusts me. Makes me disgusted with my leaders, the world, with myself. This is not what I became a soldier for. Violence I was ready for the sake of protecting the empire. But torture? And the rumor is that this man has done nothing wrong except say that human beings should be free to be their true selves. Is that so wrong to believe that? Tell me there's something more to life than this. Something more than men beating men and women, nailing them to bits of wood, turning them into human trees, creaking in the wind until there's nothing left. But I am thirsty. Tell me, please. Tell me there is something, just a hint of something good. Something pure, like a baby's smile, like a man with clean hands, like this man dying on a tree, like a love in this world which can bring us home.
They crucified him. They crucified him. We went to the place where he was hanging. We didn't want him to die alone. When it was close to the end, he put his head back and he said, "It is finished." Finished. Complete. Those are the same words you would say to a debt collector when you've made the final payment. It is finished. The debt is paid. He paid our debt. Those are my sins that he's hanging there for, not his. Everything he ever did was for us. He walked this earth, he healed people, he saved people, he touched them, he taught us, he taught us to forgive. He taught us the meaning of love, showed us grace, built our faith. He showed us how to care and love one another. My rabbi, my teacher. He showed us how to be divine in our humanity. Then he just put his head back and he said, "It is finished." But how can it be finished? It's not over. How can this be done? This walk, this time, this life, it can't be over. It just can't. What he taught us was too important. It just can't be over. His heart has stopped beating, but his love is still here. His lessons are still here. What he wanted us to know is still here. The work isn't over. My life has been changed. Everything has changed. He will always be with me, now and forever. Now and forever, I'll remember all the promises still unbroken, and think about all the words between us that never needed to be spoken. I miss the tears, I miss the laughter, I miss the
It was unbearable. Yet somehow, it's as everyone says, life goes on. But Martha and I couldn't seem to find much comfort in that or in each other, because our brother Lazarus was dead, and down the road in a tomb, his body already rotting, dead for 4 days. I was exhausted, bone-tired, weary from tending Lazarus with no hope, from watching him die and then preparing his body for the tomb. Wearied from Martha not being herself, which was frightening. Her stoic presence and her swift efficiency gone. Now I just saw her trembling hesitation and hands that couldn't stop reaching for Lazarus's chair. I was exhausted from that strange cycle of staring, numb, then clutching pain that I couldn't seem to stop. The only relief I felt was when a fury gripped me, my head hot and my heart thumping so hard that I could hear it, I swear. My fury was directed at someone I never imagined would be the focus of my rage, our beloved Rabbi, Jesus. For not being there, for not preventing this terrible thing, Jesus didn't show up. He didn't show up to help, to heal my brother. And now, 4 days later, it was just too late. Too late to heal him or even to bring him back from the dead, which he had done for others. Our tradition says that the soul stays near the body no longer than 3 days after death. There was no hope even for a miracle. Normally, I am a strong woman. I'm secure in who I am, what I do, who I love, and I'm lucky enough to know that I am loved. My family and I loved Jesus. We trusted him. We thought we knew him and thought that he loved us. I realized then that I never really understood what bewilderment or abandonment meant. This was it, and it was unbearable. The portion of King David's psalm, which I've spoken aloud all of my life, I entrust my spirit into your hands. Rescue me, Lord, for you are a faithful God. That psalm offered no comfort to me now. It only added fire to the fuel of my rage and wretched tears to my heartbroken bewilderment. Then, Martha burst in to tell me that Jesus was here, finally, and that she already let him have it. And her voice was hoarse and raspy from crying because she accused him. She told Jesus that Lazarus wouldn't have died if he had come even a week ago. Oh, I flew out there to give him a piece of my mind and broken heart too. Jesus said something about showing the glory of God and that we must go to the tomb. And as he spoke, he wept. Well, we also wept and we protested. Lord, Lazarus's body has been there for 4 days. The smell, horrendous. But again, Jesus said we would see the glory of God. And oh, glory, let me tell you, we did. A neighborhood crowd had gathered now, but we did as Jesus asked and opened the tomb, and Jesus shouted into it that Lazarus should come out. I stood shaking and shaking my head. I had heard about Jesus shouting only once before, at the temple when he threw over the money changers' wooden tables. Now that power and resonance of his voice shook me. Then wild hope surged through me, and Lazarus walked out. Oh, my heart, oh, my Lord, my God, what staggering joy. Some days later, we invited Jesus to have dinner with us, Lazarus, Martha, and me together again. And I was compelled to thank him, to anoint him, to love him. So I knelt and poured ointment over his feet. Jesus' voice shook me once again during that terrible day on Golgotha. Only days after our dinner in Bethany, at Golgotha his hands were nailed to a crossbeam, and those feet were nailed and barely touching this ledge attached to that Roman cross. Some friends and family were huddled there through those terrible hours, listening as he murmured to us and to God. And then, oh, the power in his voice as he called out loudly those words from that same psalm that had failed to comfort me. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He was dying, yet he spoke so strongly and loudly. Why, I wondered as I fearfully glanced about. Then my gaze settled on Jesus again, and my eyes were opened. He was speaking for himself and for all around him, not just our small group. Even then, at the time of his death, he was rabbi, teacher, guide. I realized that Jesus was in loving, trusting, intimate communication with Yahweh, and he still found it within himself to include everyone in that proclamation, even those who only think that they are the powers that be, the soldiers, our leaders, the death mongers, even death itself. But of course, Jesus knew that God was with him, and I knew, hallelujah, that God was there. For Jesus and for us in that place and in this place and at that time and in this time and for all time, for the living and the dying, in every moment we commit our spirits to God. Now, especially now, every day that we live. I, Mary of Bethany, agree to have this account written and recorded in order to let you know of my experience with Jesus. An experience that cannot help but beget hope. Hope that frees us to live in the present with the deep trust, thank you, Jesus, that God will never leave us.
about his love. Think about his goodness. Think about his grace that brought us through. For as high as the heavens above, so great is the measure of our Savior's love. Great is the measure of our Savior's love. Think about his love. Think about his love. Think about his goodness. So good. Think about his grace that's brought us through. For as high as the heavens above, so great is the measure of our Savior's love. Great is the measure